You're about to spend $50,000 on a steel building. You've done the research. You've watched the ads. You've done the research. You've watched the ads. You've seen the glossy photos of perfect Quonset huts, sitting on green farmland, looking solid, looking permanent, looking like the smartest investment a man could make. And right now, somewhere in a factory very much like the one behind me, a worker is rolling your panels, cutting your steel, boxing up your kit. And he knows something you don't. I was that worker. For 3 years, I stood on that factory floor. I ran the roll former machine. I measured the panels. I watched the orders come in. And I watched what actually went out the door. And I'm telling you right now, what gets shipped to customers and what gets advertised to customers are two completely different things. I'm not here to attack one company. I'm not here to start drama. I'm here because I watched a retired farmer spend his life savings on a building he trusted, and 18 months later, that building had rust bleeding down the walls, panels buckling at the seams, and a warranty department that stopped returning his calls. That man deserved to know what I knew before he signed that contract. And so do you. So let's start at the very beginning. Because before you can understand what they're hiding, you need to understand exactly what a Quonset hut is, why it became so popular, and why that popularity created the perfect conditions for one of the most quietly dishonest industries in the construction market today. A Quonset hut is a prefabricated steel arch structure, half-cylinder shape, no interior columns, no complex framing, just curved steel panels that bolt together and form a self-supporting shell. The design goes back to World War II, developed by the U.S. Navy for rapid deployment shelters. Strong concept, simple engineering, proven design. Fast forward a day and the internet is absolutely flooded with companies selling these kits to farmers, ranchers, small business owners, and homesteaders. The pitch is always the same. Affordable, durable, easy to assemble, lasts a lifetime. And on paper, that pitch is completely believable, because the original military-grade Quonset huts were all those things. The problem is what you're buying today is not what the military built in 1941. Not even close. Here's where the first betrayal starts. And it starts with a number. That number is gauge. Steel gauge is a measurement of thickness. And this is where you need to pay extremely close attention, because the gauge system works backwards from what you'd expect. The higher the gauge number, the thinner the steel. 14-gauge steel is thick, strong, serious steel. 26-gauge steel is closer to the thickness of a tin can. Almost every Quonset kit company advertises their product using language like premium steel or heavy-duty panels or commercial-grade construction. And buried in the fine print, if you can even find it, you'll see the actual gauge number. Sometimes it's listed as a range. Sometimes it's not listed at all. I watched panels get rolled at 26 gauge get boxed into kits that were marketed as 14 gauge quality buildings. 26 gauge. The difference between those two is not a small technicality. It is a difference between a structure that handles a serious snow load and a structure that quietly deforms under its own weight over 3 winters. In snowy climates, the consequences of undersized steel are not theoretical. Buildings collapse, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually. A crease forms in one panel. The arch starts to flatten slightly at the crown. Water starts pooling instead of shedding. Ice accumulates. And one February morning, you walk out and half your roof has folded inward like a crushed can. I saw photos of that exact scenario get shared in our break room. Nobody laughed. Everybody knew why it happened. So what do you do about it? You verify gauge before you pay a single dollar. You don't take the salesman's word. You don't trust the brochure. You ask for the actual certified mill test report for the steel coils they're using. Any legitimate manufacturer has this document. It shows the exact thickness, the steel grade, the tensile strength. If a company hesitates to send you that document, if they say it's proprietary or unavailable, walk away. Walk away immediately and don't look back. When a building does arrive, bring a digital caliper with you during unloading. Measure the flat section of a panel, not the corrugated rib, the flat section. Compare that measurement against the published gauge chart. If there's a discrepancy, you have grounds to refuse delivery. Most men never do this. Most men assume they'll get what they paid for. That assumption is exactly what these companies are counting on. Now, let's talk about rust, because the way this industry talks about rust protection is one of the most creative pieces of dishonesty I've ever witnessed in any business. Walk through any Quonset Hut website, and you will see words like galvanized, zinc-coated, rust-resistant, and corrosion-protected plastered everywhere. Sounds bulletproof, right? Here's what those words actually mean in practice. Galvanization is a legitimate process. Hot-dip galvanizing, done correctly, creates a zinc coating thick enough to protect steel for decades, even in harsh environments. That is real galvanization. What most kit companies are using is called G60 or G90 coating, a light zinc layer that meets the minimum ASTM standard, but is nowhere near the protection those marketing words imply. And here's where it gets worse. Every panel in a Quonset kit gets cut. It gets punched with bolt holes. It gets trimmed at the edges. Every single one of those cuts removes the zinc coating and exposes raw steel directly to the air. Those exposed edges are where rust begins. Within months of installation, you will see orange staining bleeding out from every bolt hole and every cut edge. The companies call it cosmetic rust. They say it doesn't affect structural integrity. And technically, initially, they're correct. But cosmetic rust becomes structural rust. It's not a question of if. It's a question of how fast. And in humid climates, coastal environments, or anywhere with freeze-thaw cycles, that timeline is not 50 years. It's closer to 7 to 10. The warranty, which I'll come back to in detail, is specifically written to exclude this entire process while using language that makes you think you're covered. We'll get there, but right now I want to tell you about the day that changed how I thought about this whole industry. I was on the shipping floor during a particularly heavy week. Orders were backed up. The line supervisor was pushing everyone to move faster, and I watched the kit get assembled for shipping that was missing an entire section of end wall framing components. Not a small accessory. Structural framing. The pieces that allow you to actually enclose the ends of the building, hang doors, install windows. I flagged it. I said something. I was told the customer would call if there was a problem. That is the attitude. That is the culture. Missing parts are industry-wide. Talk to anyone who has assembled a Quonset kit and ask them if they received everything on the parts manifest on the first delivery. The silence will tell you everything. Common missing items include anchor bolts, closure strips of the base. Those are the pieces that seal the gap between your concrete and the bottom of the arch, and wall hardware, and sometimes entire ridge cap sections. The problem is not just inconvenience. Missing anchor bolts on the day of your pour means you either reschedule your concrete crew, which costs money, or you proceed without them and create a structure that is not properly anchored to its foundation. Missing base closure strips means you have an open gap at ground level where moisture, rodents, and cold air enter continuously. Calling the company to get missing pieces shipped can take weeks. Meanwhile, your building sits partially assembled, your crew has gone home, and your timeline is destroyed. The fix is this. Before you accept delivery, before the truck leaves your property, pull out the complete parts manifest and count every single item. Check every bag of hardware. Count every panel. Verify every piece of end wall framing. This takes time. Do it anyway, because once the driver leaves, you own whatever is or isn't in those boxes. Now here's something the marketing materials make sound very impressive. Load ratings. Every Quonset kit is sold with specific numbers. This building can handle 30 pounds per square foot of snow load. This building can withstand 90-mile-per-hour wind. These numbers on the sales page, in the brochure, in the email the salesman sends you. Those numbers are real. They are also almost entirely meaningless for the average buyer. Here's why. Those load ratings are calculated under a very specific set of assumptions. Perfect foundation. Perfectly installed panels torqued to the exact specified foot-pounds of force. Panels aligned within the manufacturer's tolerance. Base plates anchored correctly into properly cured concrete. All of this done in ideal conditions by people who have assembled these structures before. Now consider the actual reality. Most Quonset kits are assembled by the buyer, his two brothers-in-law, and one guy from Craigslist who said he was handy. No one has a torque wrench. The bolts get tightened by feel. The foundation was poured last weekend and cured for 4 days instead of the specified 28. Research on bolted steel connections is very clear on this. Under-torque connections can reduce joint strength by 30 to 50%. When you scale that across an entire arch structure with hundreds of connections, you are not building to the rated load specification. You are building to something significantly below it. And you will never know how far below until the structure is tested by a real load event. And when that event happens, a heavy wet snow, a wind event, an ice storm, and your building suffers damage, guess what the company's first line of defense will be? Improper installation. They will say you didn't follow the instructions. They will say the foundation wasn't adequate. They will say the assembly wasn't completed correctly. And because none of this was inspected by anyone with credentials, they will almost certainly be right in a legal sense, even if they're completely wrong in a moral sense. Most Quonset kits sold to residential and agricultural buyers come with zero engineer drawings stamped by a licensed structural engineer. They come with assembly instructions. There's a profound difference between the two. If you ever need a building permit, and in most jurisdictions for a structure of any significant size, you will discover this difference at the permit office when they ask for stamped engineering drawings, and you hand them a spiral-bound instruction manual. Before you buy, ask specifically whether stamped engineering drawings from a licensed engineer in your state are included or available. Ask whether the building has been tested and certified to meet the specific local building code in your jurisdiction. If the answer to either question is vague, you have your answer about what kind of company you're dealing with. Let's talk about what happens inside one of these buildings after it goes up, because this is the part nobody talks about in the ads, and it is the part that makes people absolutely furious once they experience it. Steel conducts heat and cold. A steel arch with no thermal break between inside and outside is essentially a giant radiator in summer and a giant heat sink in winter. The temperature inside an uninsulated Quonset hut in July is not the same as outside. It is significantly hotter. Direct sun on a steel roof drives interior temperatures to levels that are genuinely dangerous for humans and will destroy anything sensitive. Hay, stored equipment, electronics, livestock. In cold months, the steel skin of the building gets cold. Warm, humid air from inside the structure contacts that cold surface and condenses. Every morning, moisture is forming inside your building on every panel surface. That moisture drips onto stored equipment, feeds mold, accelerates corrosion from the inside, and creates a floor that is permanently damp. This is not a design flaw. It is a physics reality of uninsulated steel construction, and the companies know it completely. The solution is insulation. Spray foam applied to the interior surface of every panel is the most effective approach. It creates a thermal break, it eliminates condensation, and it adds measurable rigidity to the structure. It is also extraordinarily expensive. Spray foam on a 40 by 60-foot Quonset hut can run $15,000. Some jobs run higher. That cost is never mentioned on the sales page. It is never included in the price comparison against a traditional building. It simply doesn't exist in the marketing conversation until after you've already bought. Some companies sell fiberglass bat insulation systems designed to hang inside the arch. These are cheaper. They are also largely ineffective at resolving the condensation issue because they don't create a continuous vapor barrier against the steel surface. You end up with insulation that gets wet, loses its R value, and eventually becomes a mold habitat. Plan for the actual cost of your building. Take the kit price. Add foundation, add freight, add assembly, add insulation done correctly. Now compare that total to a steel frame building, a fabric structure, or a pole barn. Do the comparison honestly with all costs included. For many applications, the Quonset kit stops looking like the affordable option the moment you add everything in. Now I promise to come back to the warranty. And this section matters because the warranty is a document people point to as their protection. It is the reason men sign contracts feeling safe. Here is how a typical Quonset kit warranty actually works. The panel rust warranty excludes surface rust. Read that again. The rust warranty, the protection against rust, excludes surface rust. The justification is that surface rust is cosmetic and does not affect structural integrity in the early stages. What they don't acknowledge is that surface rust is how all rust starts. There is no structural rust that was not first surface rust. The assembly warranty requires that installation was completed according to the manufacturer's instructions. Since no licensed inspector was present during assembly, the company has enormous latitude to claim that any damage is a result of improper installation. This is not theoretical. This is the argument that gets made in almost every warranty dispute this industry produces. And here is the detail that should genuinely concern every buyer. A very significant number of Quonset kit companies operate as LLCs with relatively low capitalization. When warranty disputes become serious enough to involve attorneys, when complaints pile up enough to create reputational damage, when the cost of honoring warranties would exceed what the business can absorb, the LLC closes. A new LLC opens. Same people, same factory, slightly different name. The warranty you were sold belongs to a company that no longer legally exists. This is not speculation. Research your seller's company history before you buy. Search the principal's names. Look at what other businesses they've operated. Look for BBB complaints under former business names. Look at how long the company has been operating under its current name. If it's less than 5 years old, ask yourself why. So what does a smart buyer actually do? Because I said at the beginning, Quonset buildings can be good. The concept is sound. The design has genuine advantages. Clear span interior, relatively fast assembly, lower cost and stick frame for pure square footage. The problem is not the product category. The problem is an industry that has learned it can cut corners on a technically complex product and sell to buyers who lack the expertise to catch it in time. Demand a certified mill test report for the steel before you sign anything. This document proves what gauge and grade of steel you are actually getting. If they won't send it, walk away. Require stamped engineering drawings from a licensed engineer registered in your state. This protects you at the permit office, protects you during construction, and creates a legal record of what the structure was supposed to be built to. Get a complete parts manifest before payment, and make it contractually binding. Every bolt, every cap strip, every piece of hardware listed by part number and quantity. Any shortage at delivery becomes a breach of contract, not a customer service inconvenience. Budget honestly. Foundation, freight, assembly labor, spray foam insulation. Add all of it before you compare prices with alternatives. You might still choose the Quonset, but choose it with open eyes. Call 3 customers who bought from this company within the last 2 years. Not the testimonials on the website, not the 5-star reviews. Call real people. Ask how the delivery went. Ask if anything was missing. Ask how the company handled problems. The answers you get in those phone calls are worth more than any brochure ever written. And finally, consider the alternative seriously. Fabric tension structures offer similar clear span interiors at competitive prices with dramatically better thermal performance. Steel frame prefab buildings give you a design that supports conventional insulation systems. Pole barns, properly built, have a cost-to-performance ratio that beats Quonset kits for agricultural use in most scenarios. The right building for you might still be a Quonset. I'm not telling you never to buy one. I'm telling you to buy one the way a man who has stood on that factory floor would buy one, with documentation, with verification, with a contract that protects you and not just a seller. Because the worker rolling your panels right now is doing exactly what I did. He's following instructions. He's hitting production targets. He's not thinking about your farm or your business or your $50,000. That's your job. Now you know how to do it.